webinar. The title is The Personal Challenge and Emergent Opportunities for Engineers and Their Educators in the Disruptive World of Business and Society. We have Elsie Maio, one of the speakers, founder of Humanity Inc. and creator of Soul Branding from New York. And then we have Mila Popovich, founder, Evolving Leadership, Chair, World Academy of Art and Science. So Elsie will lead off, and then Mila will continue the discussion with her presentation. Just a quick background. We have Elsie is anticipated mega trends and guided leaders to the sweet spot in them for decades. These individuals and organizations include impact entrepreneurs, educators, global institutions, other listed companies in virtually all sectors of the world economy. Perhaps of interest for the STEM community, IEEE, IBM, Raytheon, and Sustainability Limited. Starting on Wall Street, then the strategic consulting agency McKinsey & Company, Elsie has dedicated her own cross-functional advisory firm Humanity Inc. To promoting whole systems well-being in 1997. Lately, the appetite of leaders to generate inclusive well-being for their stakeholders is accelerating as they are pressured by whole system hyper-interdependencies. That in turn is accelerating the need to educate a workforce to meet these new requirements. Mila Popovich is a leading voice for the emergent global standards of ethics in the fields of science and technology, education, and the economy and democratic systems. She is a member of and advisor to the global boards of several meta-level policy and convening organizations. In that role, Mila represents the World Academy of Art and Science, founded by Albert Einstein, Robert Oppenheimer, and Bertrand Russell at the United Nations Economic and Social Council, and she chairs two of its board committees. Mila is one of the select brains trust of ethical markets and also lectures at the World University Consortium. What a delightful a couple of people that we have today for our webinar, and it'll be distinguished, and I'm sure we will have a great time listening to them. So I'm going to hand this over to presentation to Elsie.
Krishna, I thank you so much for inviting us and for the amazing series that you have put together. And I thank you also for that introduction. Just to, again, clarify for everybody, the perspective that I'm coming from is I'm not an engineer and I'm not an educator. I'm a strategic consultant to organizations, some of which you see on the screen here. And most of these clients we have served since over the past 20 years or so, most of them helping them to reposition themselves in into new trends, and many of them helping them to align their business practices with human values and the well-being of the web of life. So it's in that context that that I'm speaking. And when Krishna first asked me to send him a little write-up about what we would be doing here today, I thought, you know, the prevailing concern in business and society today is just uncertainty, anxiety about the future, and about the existential crises that are just palpable, that are disrupting business, industry, geopolitical balances. And the word that came to my mind was fraught. It's one of those words that conveys often and triggers the very emotion that it's meant to describe. Filled with or likely to result in something undesirable. For many individuals and institutions, there's a sense of we are at a crucible, and it's a big one. So in that context, I thought, gosh, how is it to be an educator and an educator of engineers today in a situation like that, where you don't know where the future is going. And it's your job to actually lead people and prepare people for the future. So the way that we are looking at it, there is another side. There's something else on the other side of fraud. And it may not be apparent. And so what we'd like to do today is talk about what may not be apparent, but a positive momentum, a positive direction toward the future that has special opportunities as well as challenges for educators, and in particular, educators of engineers. So joining me is a special guest, Mila Popovich, who is a voice for the future of education, and who chairs two initiatives in particular at the World Academy of Art and Science, as Krishna said. So I'm going to talk about the positive momentum toward a model of whole system well-being that's emerging in business and finance, and then talk about the implications for science and engineering educators. And then Mila will give us an example of momentum at the level of meta policy, where two institutions, the IEEE and the World Academy of Art and Science, are collaborating cross-discipline on the future of education. So that's how we're planning to run it. And if I start going over, Krishna, over time, I'd like to stick with 20 minutes. Would you please give me a 5-minute heads up? I'd appreciate that.
I will do that. Yep.
Okay, good. So when we look at all of these fraught situations, so many of them are being attributed to business. And the way that big business, the way that the corporate structure has been operating, has caused tremendous instability, certainly in income, in well-being, and in other aspects of the human condition, including pollution and the environment, et cetera. And when we look deeply into that, you know, what is it that's been driving it? Well, 5 years ago, it occurred to us, it's that its goal is actually not at all inclusive of the well-being of the system. In fact, we live in a whole system reality, but we behave as if we don't. And this is part of the reason we think that business is really getting the backlash now, that in fact, it's been driven by financial fundamentalism. It's about maximizing growth, profits, accumulating wealth. It's a win-lose dynamic. It's based on exclusivity and protection. Now, we know that business has come under fire for this, but we also need to look at all of our institutions and see how this approach to commerce has actually seeped into the culture of academia, for example, or any other institution. It's actually become part of how we operate and internalized in our cultures. So it's something for all of us to look at. But it's gotten to the point where there's a backlash that's considerable, and you see it in all sorts of disruption coming from civil society. In the tech industry, we'll talk about that in particular because it's close to home for you. The walkout of employees at Google, the protests and the strikes and the letters that have gone to management at Amazon, demanding that they resign certain government contracts. What's happening is that there is a transition from consumers and employees to citizens. The citizen voice is raising demands. And once that happens, especially in the tech industry, with a very tight talent market, you'll see that there are responses. And what, in fact, these employees are protesting is a mindset. It's not just Me Too. It's not just the abuse, gender discrimination, racial discrimination. There's an entire mindset that's being protested. And it comes from the sense of betrayal is so strong, because essentially the predation that business has been operating under, that paradigm, has been the truth, but all of the marketing and the voice of the corporation has been about, we care about you. And so they've essentially been satisfied to present themselves as compassionate predators. And this is not done yet. Even this week, you saw the Business Roundtable issue a statement. But if you look under what Jamie Dimon, who was the voice of this, said, basically they said, we're going to do what we said we would be doing all these past 10, 15 years since the sustainability movement caught fire. We're going to be fair to employees and we'll be fair to the environment. And frankly, that's still the position of a compassionate predator. They still have not stepped aside from financial fundamentalism. And you see that response in the backlash in social media and other places today. Instead of being comfortable with sustainability programs, corporate social responsibility, worthy causes, it's going to take a leap. It's going to take a leap into something that embraces whole system value and embraces whole system identity. And right now, we are in between jumping to that next S curve, and it's a fraught place. So right in the middle here, in this gap, is where all this turbulence is. And it's a challenge for everybody, but it's a particular challenge for educators and other leaders. I'm reminded of the Latin word educo, educate, comes from that, to lead out of. If it's our job to lead people out of something, well, we cannot do it from behind, and that suggests we've got to do it first. That's part of the challenge. For engineers and engineering educators, you have some advantages. For one thing, in a world where trust barometers are turning negative, which is to say that people trust that their institutions are going to hurt them, still, young people do trust the academy. So there is some credibility there that the academy will be fair and honest. So you have that going for you. Another one is that among the characteristics of whole system well-being of that paradigm, integrity is one of the strongest. And by integrity, I'll ask you to think about a bicycle wheel. Integrity as wholeness, integers or whole numbers. Integrity as a bicycle wheel whose spokes are all functional and supporting in a virtuous circle. That sort of integrity. And of course, it implies a personal integrity, which is one of the attributes associated with engineers and scientists. In fact, in the business community, and this is a study of institutional investors who, it's a study of trust, it shows that the engineer and the scientist, technical experts within a company, are trusted as much as the CEO. So there is something inherent in engineers, scientists that have the benefit of the doubt in a very fraught, mistrusted situation. And that's something to build on as you're thinking about where to bring, where to lead your students toward and what to encourage in them. And so, again, when we look again at business and the investment world, the next gen investment criteria, and these are new. Like, think of the left side as being the old financial fundamentalism. We're still in that model, but less so, where the only thing investors really cared about was margin and profitability, cash flow, all of those typical metrics, traditional metrics of business performance. But suddenly, again, here we are in that gap, and there is a new emphasis on business contribution to society. And in fact, in recent years, as one of my colleagues, Peter Fusaro, tweeted just the other day, environmental, social, and governance issues have gone mainstream. And what that means is that the consideration of impact on the environment, on society, and governance, self-governance, are taking a major seat in the management criteria of companies, as well as role in society. So we think that's good momentum. And it's something in the fraught gap that we're all in for leaders and educators to pay attention to and feed. In a very specific way. There's data and practices, information, sources and resources as you think about how you're going to be encouraging your students and showing them what's possible in this new world. There are many resources available. At the end of my slides, I've got a list of them. But data about the momentum and growth of investment. And of course, this affects where they will be employed. When millennials and Gen X think about the kind of their own values, and they do think about themselves as being responsible, particularly Gen X, in a larger sense, where shall they work? Well, let's point them in the direction of where the growth markets are that are supporting whole systems well-being. Clean energy is one of those. There are more. Again, in a practical sense, it may not be obvious to those of us who are immersed in the zeitgeist and in the world of financial fundamentalism, but there is a world of practice and learning and expertise that has been under the surface. It's been called sustainability. It's called the circular economy. And it's not about talk. I mean, this is about very practical applications, one of which is Bill McDonough and Michael Braungart's list of chemicals that are that should not be used in the environment or in the food system. And they have developed this cradle-to-cradle certification program for the chemistry of products. This is, as I said, a whole world. But you know, we've got practices in this new world also. As I said, there are models and practices, but there's a danger, you know, that one might get enamored with something like clean energy, but be creating a toxic work environment for women in engineering. And again, our challenge is to shift our mindset and our heart set, if you will, to identifying with the well-being of the whole system. You know, and when I I think about a system, the whole system. I'm talking about the whole system. You know, human is just one nodule in the fauna node on the ecosystem of our Earth. This is the kind of context that we're talking about. And when we do that, this felt sense of humanity, and combine that with new skills, will, and resources, then we're on our way. And there is momentum in all of these areas. To give you an example, what is it like for a consumer products company to think about metrics at the level of whole system well-being? Well, in the center of this, and this is Unilever. This is something that Unilever has done. In the center of this image is a woman cooking on a pot. And Unilever looked at that as their potential customer and thought, well, what is the real cost of her meal? The real cost of her meal is that she's got to go out at night often and gather wood. And that costs, 7 hours a day. And the risk, a high risk of rape, because she's got to go far to find that. She doesn't have the time to be educated. Her health is affected by the fumes from the charcoal that she's using. And she's spending a third of her income on fuel. Now, are these the metrics used by a financial fundamentalist? No. These are the metrics used by an empathic member with humility who experiences themselves at a felt level in the web of life. That's an illustration of how the momentum that's happening sub rosa, under the scenes. Another example I'll give you, and I'm wondering about time here. I better start moving. Another example of new metrics comes from, and this is a case that is very interesting because it's a disruptor in the insurance market that could not be doing what it's doing if it were not for technology. And I'm not talking about communication technology or fundamental infrastructure. I'm talking about a specific application of technology that allowed this insurance company to manage the risk of offering insurance to small farm holders. And this is a model that would require that technologists, engineers, scientists actually sit at the table with the development expert who's concerned about the small farm holders and drought, and sit at the table with the intermediary who has access to resources and management skills at the very beginning. So collectively they can imagine what's possible. And I'll just give you a quick rundown of this. This company started over dinner when a daughter who worked in development was updating her mother on what she was working on, and she was concerned about small farm holders in Africa in particular who were vulnerable to extreme weather conditions because they couldn't afford the type of seeds that were resistant to those problems. And her mother, who happens to be a professor at the University of Pennsylvania in economics, said to her, well, what about insurance? What's the role, where's insurance in that? And the daughter turned to her and said, well, that's for you, Mom. And so Joan Lamb Tennant, the professor, who also is a management advisor, developed a business plan and brought it to a group of major insurance companies, and now a consortium of 8 insurance companies are supporting the development of small farm holder and related insurance services to stabilize these families, households, communities, and their livelihoods. The only reason why they could do it is because there's technology that can help them ascertain the risk in the fields, literally.
Try to finish up 3 or 4 minutes. So
Okay, great.
Time. Yeah.
Okay. So again, we can have our hearts in the right place, but if we're not supported, and if we don't also, and this is the second challenge, work on systems support. For example, transforming the criteria for succeeding in our personal jobs, where collaboration between departments is encouraged. Transforming the metrics we use to measure the success of marketing. Instead of reach, how about transforming well-being? So there's work to be done, and there are some systems that have started doing that. This is one of them that we actually started using after working with IBM to identify the economic value of values and what that would look like in action. So this is only one of those, and we look forward to engineers and scientists to help business to actually flesh out our systems and our ability to do well by doing good. These are some resources that we think are especially suited to whole system well-being for you, and we'll be happy to share that in the slides and talk about it later in the Q&A if you'd like. And now, Mila, I apologize, I'm over a bit.
No, you're fine. We started 10 minutes late with my introduction and a little bit of technical issues, so we're fine. So Elsie, thank you so much. This is such a fascinating, inspiring topic that you got us going on. While we're handing this over to Mila, let me remind the audience that that Elsie has really got us reflecting on some very serious issues relevant to our community. So feel free to just send me a text question saying I have a comment, and I'll unmute you. Okay, or you can just send your comment as a text message. But I'll be happy to unmute you once Mila is done, and maybe some of us can have a little chat about some of the issues, really enormous issues that Elsie and Mila have brought to us to the table today. So Mila, I'm going to make you a presenter, and you can take it from there. You just have to click show my screen, Mila.
Yes, thank you very much. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes, absolutely. Just put on full screen mode and you'll be all set.
Very good. I appreciate that. And first and foremost, thank you all for being here, and especially for Dr. Krishna Vedula and the India Universal Collaboration for Engineering Education for creating this opportunity, as well as the exciting series of IFEES webinars that we are participating in, and I would say co-create. And my special thanks go exactly to my co-creator, Elsie Maio, for not only setting us up this morning in such a powerful way with a deep understanding where we are individually in this economic network and system that we are all inhabiting and participating in, but also where we are at collectively and where we're going to go. Most importantly, I'm very grateful to her for being basically the pathfinder for decades now on these issues. If I would really like to call on the audience to understand that she has been leading the shift. It seems like she's assessing it for us and presenting to us a bigger picture, but in fact, she has been the leader in this domain for so long that, speaking of the challenges, I can only imagine what she has gone through for us to be able to show up to this moment and have a meaningful discussion on not only where we're at, what the challenges of the situation are, but what the marvelous opportunities of going forward together are, as many have been working in the forefront of this shift. And I'm excited to be here with you, with educators. That is my passion, that is my background. I am multiple of things. I am an academic, I'm also an artist and an activist. And in all of those roles, in all of those capacities, I've been working for shifting the consciousness primarily, individual and collective, so that we inhabit a more noble spaces, you know, community spaces and collective spaces, right along with creating a more well-being focused collective space that we possibly can. So in that sense, we're not only speaking of where we're at, but where we're going. And I think going by what the greater web of life, of which Elsie spoke, is directing us, and the larger life intelligence is pushing us to go, we will have to go more creative and more wholesome places than we have been going so far. So thank you again, and I just want to quickly speak of a facet, a vital facet to this co-creative wheel of all human activity that is vitally interconnected, and the one that is dearest to me is education and the transformation of education. In that capacity, as an educator and the transformer of education, I have been associated with multiple high-profile, high-ranking global organizations that are leaders in service all over the world in transforming education. One of the greatest delights that I've had is to be working with disciplines that are outside of my own domain, which are humanities and liberal arts. This is where I started from, but humanities have been giving me this overarching kind of meta perspective on the civilizational shifts and movements. And from there, I've been able to work with a variety of organizations and industries as well, such as businesses, policymakers, engineers, I mean, you name it, and artists along the way as well. So most recently, I have just returned from a conference of which I will speak in a minute, that has been co-convened and co-conceptualized by the renowned IEEE Association and the World Academy of Art and Science, where you have science-based innovative, technology innovative association reaching out to the World Academy saying we need to sit at the same table and go beyond that. In fact, we need to co-create some new initiatives, new associations that will take us forward in a much more wholesome way, addressing the future trends, addressing the ethics of innovation, addressing the general global direction we'll be taking. And that's really, really exciting news to be having this transdisciplinary approach, to have friends, new professional friends sitting together in a gathering that is future focused and a better future focused. So I have been thinking today with you about the future of engineering as well as education as that, you know, system for, means for engineering of the future. And as you already know from what Elsie has staged for us, and I'm sure from your own personal experiences in your own academic and institutional and industry environments, we have this constant push and pull that Elsie mentioned, this sense of fraughtness, of this tautness, of tension between what we know we need and what we must inhabit and practice. And we understand that in terms of education, we have been inhabiting and working with and applying a system that is way, way outdated, that has been engineered, if you will, socially engineered for industrial era. And we have a whole new set of conditions, variables, and challenges that we're dealing with today that has to push us into engendering a different educational system, understanding that based on that, we're socializing individuals to function within certain systems that could be beneficial or can be highly detrimental, as we know. So within the work that I've just mentioned in my associations, World Academy of Art and Science, which has been founded in 1960, mind you, a quick historical backdrop, at the time of highly polarized political global system of Cold War, because they realized that the knowledge we are producing and the energy we are investing in science are being co-opted by a nationalist interests and polarizing the psyches of people, collective mindsets, as well as the political setting into this maddening blocks. And the World Academy and the scientists behind it, such as Oppenheimer, Margaret Mead, Oppenheimer, a highly disillusioned scientist, but highly heartened human being, was highly concerned. And Einstein and Bertrand Russell, among others, realized this is a maddening world, and we refuse to participate in this kind of polarizing, violently polarizing situation, and decided to create a a think tank, or in modern terms, but rather honorary society of scientists and artists that are focused on the social responsibility of science, and regaining our wisdom and our knowledge and turning it into a collective wisdom, rather, for the benefit of society. So as you will see from this snapshot from the website, just to give you a sense, we have a comprehensive approach to things where we understand that all of these issues and domains of human activity are vitally interconnected, and that we have to address them in that way rather than the siloed off way. And on the left side, you have another conference coming up in October in Bari as well, in Italy again, human-centered symbiotic system science for Industry 4.0. So we're thinking at the level of system sciences, we're thinking in the level of symbiotic, connecting the human to the machine, and infusing the machine with a different kind of mindset and value drivers that are focused on the good for the all, rather than biased and twisted, I would say, ethical codes that we've been putting in the machines. And we're focused on the human-centered but technical animal, if you will, and symbiotic co-creative system that the humans have become. And there's nothing to be terrified of here, I should say, because we are and have always been creatures of techne. That is our gift. Our very nature is of the cultural setup. We are the tool makers, we're the symbolic animals, we're the myth makers and the machine makers. And that is our gift, because we work with the mind and its creative capacities. But the question is the ethics that we bring to that creation that will inform our future. And this discussion in which we are afraid of artificial intelligence. And as Churchill said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. I would take that further and say, we have nothing to fear but ourselves. And in that sense, we have to understand our ethical drivers, our values, our psychological processes, to understand how we can shift them to finer human beings that will have finer machines that will make our growth and our going forward more enjoyable, more accomplished, in the sense that they work for the greater number of us all. So just to give you a sample of what the discussions are in the World Academy and its brainchild, if you will, which is the World University Consortium, founded at Berkeley in 2013, where we have one of the greatest and the strongest programming directions is focus on transformation of education and creating a convening ground that will bring together leading universities, institutions such as Library of Alexandria, such as International Association of University Presidents, amongst others that are coming together as founding and charter members of this organization. So we are looking at the broadest and highest possible convening space that will bring in best practices as well as visionary focus for the transformation of education. This to give you a broader perspective of where I'm coming from, but where we are all going, I think, and what we should all be connected to. And a quick background on where my thinking here is coming from. And I just wanted to give you 3 pointers here where my reasoning and my perspective are based in or sourced in. And that's why I call them disciplines of inquiry, both in pursuit of knowledge, and scientific exploration, as well as opportunities for integration of this knowledge, which I think is going to be the finest of domains of integration, to have this kind of melange, to have this kind of combination of ingredients that we have in our reasoning and our research and in our perspective, in order to take ourselves, our teaching, our research, our support of students, as well as our, on the highest level, policy making forward. So my focus and my sourcing is in the disciplines and new emerging disciplines of anticipation and future studies, in systems thinking and transdisciplinarity, as well as integral knowledge, as well as psychology of transformation, because I think psychology has barely taken off. We have much, much finer and higher places to go with transforming ourselves first and foremost, as well as our social systems. This is the conference that I mentioned earlier that happened at Milan, at the Polytechnic University of Milan in Italy. That is one of the top technical universities in Europe and ranging top in the world. And we were at, significantly Leonardo da Vinci's campus. Everybody's, under his sort of the influence of the giant in sciences and humanities, and is the leader himself on the integral thinking and the renaissance of knowledge. He is also the grand figure that is informing the backdrop of this conference, in the sense that kind of infusion of the inspiration to go forward in this transdisciplinary integral way. So the focus of the conference was, as you can see, cognitive informatics and cognitive computing, but the equally the move forward, the intention forward is to be speaking of, as I will give you ideas of all the wonderful topics that we had, and you can go back to these slides, I'm sure they will be available, but to go forward and move forward from all of these. And I love the direction it's going, right? It's going from cognitive informatics, computing intelligence, to brain informatics, in the sense that we have brain inspired systems by studying neuroscience and brain, only to understand that we are actually moving towards symbiotic science and art, symbiotic systems in all ways. And I'm excited to share this with you, because this is exactly where the collaboration between World Academy as this broad thinker and convener is coming together with this most powerful professional association, I think, currently in the world. And I think it's very, very exciting times, and very, very hopeful and focused times that we have and work that we have.
Mila, can we conclude in about 3 minutes so that we can have some discussion?
Towards the end, exactly. That's wonderful. Great timing. So what I wanted to mention to you in this bigger picture of how, where we're going from these platforms, and highest, as Elsie would call them, meta-level policy making convening spaces. I wanted to kind of simplify that, and at the same time deepen and broaden this perspective, where we are working at the intersection of three powerful means that we have at our disposal. We are working at the intersection of consciousness as a creative force. And as you will notice, smugly here, I would say that my circle intentionally here is not circled off, because consciousness is supposed to be something continually evolving and drawing from higher perspective and deeper intuitive spaces. And that's why it's an open end. And capital is a constructive resource, and as well as education as this transformational system. This is giving, this is embedding us, nesting us as educators in a larger picture to understand what we have to balance collectively and in our classrooms, and what we're dealing with, and to be conscious of it. So between the facets of consciousness and capital, we're working towards models of conscious business and conscientious investing, of which Elsie spoke before. At the intersection of capital and education, we're seeing the rise of innovative scientific, but mind you, equally innovative social technologies that we have, such as new social movements, new media possibilities to express individual perspectives or collective concerns. So this is very significant that we have both scientific and social technologies emerging in the world today, and we have to be taking them into account as we're teaching as well as learning ourselves. And interestingly enough, at the intersection of consciousness and education, we are increasingly seeing development of learning organizations and living organizations, if you will, and notions of ecosystems as such, educational ecosystems, and also greater movements for social transformation. So these are the facets in kind of an elegantly simplified way to show us what we're dealing with. And as we are planning our curricula, as we are planning our approach to individual students in our classrooms, with administrators at the policy level engagement, we need to take into account where we are not trending, but where we are going in a visionary, courageous way. These are some of the resources I wanted to share with you from different perspectives. You know, and my own personal associations for you to check out these reports and powerful publications as well as initiatives that will be of benefit for you. They are the Millennium Project, one of the most renowned futures think tank in the world, with 63 countries represented and working. So it might be some of your countries out there. And we have a freshly published Work Technology 2050 that you can look at these publications and see what's coming, how it's relevant to what you're teaching in the classroom, and how it's relevant to our own personal and collective growth forward. The next one is Global Education Futures, another international association, and we have just, you know, last year published Educational Ecosystems for Societal Transformation. You can find, you know, remarkable things there, and they have been, the report has been prefaced and endorsed by Peter Senge of MIT, the very generator of the notion of learning organizations. But you'll also see Atlas of Emerging Jobs and Future Skills, and the work of a dear colleague and a newly made friend, Witold Kinsner of University of Manitoba, one of your own, professor of informatics and computational engineering at the university, an exceptional human being with whom I will be collaborating even more, but he's truly a transformer of engineering education and a practitioner with incredible initiatives that we all need to know about. Finally, my note for you is where I started from, speaking of fine work that our colleague Elsie Maio has been doing, that we have all been doing in the world, and we have all been doing at this high level organizations and convening spaces. There's an understanding that Nikola Tesla inspired work has brought to me, is the understanding that the finer the medium, the greater its capacity for energy and power transmission. And I will leave you with that note and the thought that the finer human beings we are becoming, the greater capacity individually and collectively we will have for what we know to supply everybody with what we need to sustain our lives, but also promote our creativity. And at the same time, not only to sustain ourselves, but to power ourselves forward into a future that we know is coming as we have intended it for better purposes. And that we stand a chance in all of these gatherings, on webinars, in professional associations, at all the levels of human associations, to promote that kind of finer thinking, finer interaction, and finer future that we all hope for.
Thank you so much, Mila. That was a fascinating, inspiring presentation. I will hand this back to Elsie for a couple of minutes, and then we've got our friend from Australia, James Trevelyan, would like to make a few comments. But Elsie, shall I make you the presenter?
I guess you can.
And then we can, if you want to make any concluding points, I can ask James to make his points. If you would like to.
You know, I'd really like to just a big thank you to you again. Mila, thank you for that eloquent summary and overview. And I'd really like to put the rest of the time to the audience, to the participants, and hear any questions or comments or discussion they'd like to start.
Fantastic. So I'm going to go to James Trevelyan from Australia. Come in, James. You want to, you listen quite a bit. And go ahead.
Krishna, thank you very much. And thank you, Elsie and Mila, for a very thought-provoking presentation. And I guess the comment I'm going to start with a question, perhaps for both of you, but particularly to Elsie. You mentioned collaboration. Now, my research has suggested that in the practice of individual grading, which is intrinsic to all our education systems, reinforces a notion deep in the subconscious of students. It reinforces a connection between rewards and individual effort. And consequently, when you try and get students to collaborate, they actually resist it. As I discovered, I've retired from teaching now, but it used to puzzle me why there was such a deep emotional resistance to genuine collaboration. And I realized that this grading system is essentially a hidden curriculum, which is telling students that it's individual effort that counts, not collaboration. And as you pointed out, and particularly in the world of engineering, collaboration is the core and the only way to succeed. So I have seen so many young engineers come unstuck and have great difficulties because they not only don't know about collaboration, and they don't know how to it, but they actually resist it. I wondered, how do you see us reshaping this hidden curriculum so that students come away with the deeply embedded idea that collaboration is the key?
Well, thank you, James. You know, I don't presume to have a pedagogical solution there, but I will tell you that in the business world, the same thing is true. That the old paradigm that I refer to as financial fundamentalism is still the smartest guy in the room, is the one that leaves with the most toys. You know, so the systems, such as you're talking about in education, are reinforcing the old paradigm. You know, they say the law lags 20 years. This is an example. Our next frontier, as I hope to point out in that slide that showed the gap, first, personally, we have to change ourselves, like you and I need to question our unconscious biases about things like that. But then we have to have the courage to step out and change the system or find elegant ways around it. You know, there's someone in Dartmouth, Edie Farwell, who's teaching whole system methodologies, mindsets. And she does things like, she takes people out into the desert and has them experience a whole system or find a whole system. So together, I mean, when you structure these things in teams, you could start to counterbalance. But it's a problem. I think it requires the courage of leaders to speak out about it. And just as you've done, point it out and change it. Let's change it.
Quick comment from Mila.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And I have been working, interestingly enough, I'm located here in Denver, in Colorado. And I've been speaking to some friends who are teaching, interestingly enough, also electrical engineering. I've been immersed in this field now at the University of Denver. And one of them is Dr. Gonçalo Martins, who is from Portugal and teaching here. And I have a whole list here in front of me, questions that he had as we discuss some of these issues. And the key was grading. And he struggles a lot at the university. He's a young educator, but very passionate with the same question. You said you have retired, and he's a young one. And I'm worried exactly about that. I'm worried about the fact that the new teacher, fresh teacher, is struggling with the same issue that you are with, which means that we really need to make some big pushes. But he has found some, if you will, hip and cool and innovative ways, just like Elsie's mentioning this example of the teacher, to work with students. And I think the biggest thing was to show up with students with that honesty, to show up and tell them that you are and we are struggling with the grading system, which we still have to practice, and we're in the process of transforming. But you know, you would like to devise multitudes of ways, and we would like to do that, to see how they would assess themselves. That's what he applied, and I really like that idea. Part of the assessment is that they're assessing themselves in the process, and he has multitudes of creative ways to push it forward.
Did you want to add anything, James? I think you had something else in your list. In the meantime, if anybody else would like to pop in and say, make a few comments, either text me and I will unmute you, so you can do that. So James, any
Yes,
addition?
sure. Look, thank you for that. In fact, I've written about the idea of students doing much of the teaching. They would have to be taught to teach, and students being graded on their ability to teach and inspire others. But you know, as you said, I'm retired. It's up to others at the moment. But the other comment I had, perhaps it is just a comment. You know, we're increasingly aware in Australia of our Aboriginal people who have maintained an extraordinarily complex social civilization for around, we think, 55 to 60,000 years at least. And they have a really interesting, different way of looking at what we would call the environment. Their idea of the environment is called country. And it's essentially the land and the sky in the area which they occupy. But the important difference is this: they see themselves as being part of country, part of the ground. And they also see the country as being part of them. Whereas we have this idea that the environment is something separate from us. And I think that this idea is worth a lot of further study because you have the empirical evidence that they have survived, unlike any other human civilization, over this incredible time scale. And archaeologists have pointed out to us how their traditions have been remarkably robustly maintained through that time. They've not suffered the catastrophes that other human civilizations have studied. I think we have much to learn from them.
Wow. Wow. All I can say is wow to this webinar today. All three of you.
Agreed.
Amazing comments.
Agreed. And that's where the humility comes in.
Exactly.
Beautiful. Thank you.
And James, just to mention to you, you know, we are going to have to recalibrate ourselves, you know, with all the technological advances that we have at our hands. We might actually be able, with the right ethical leadership, to do so, and to draw on the greater arc of human intelligence and human wisdom, to reconnect that arc of human intelligence from those ancient futures, if you will, to the current state of being, to understand that we are co-emergent with the earth and our system, that we are, you know, co-becoming, that we are interbeing, and we are in belonging.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Yeah.
Come on in, guys. Anybody wants to jump into this amazing discussion that we've been having, just text me saying unmute me and I will unmute you. And we have run out of time actually, so we'll just give it a shot for another 1 or 2 minutes, and then I'm sure everybody has things to do. I'm just going to wait for a minute or so while everybody is doing a little meditation.
If there are no questions, I'd just like to refer James and anyone else who's interested to a case study of the solution to an irrigation problem in Peru, where it was the indigenous people's original plan and system that modern engineers said, you know what, this is better than pouring tons of cement. We're going to adapt the indigenous system.
Wow.
Thank you very much for that.
We did have a comment from a gentleman from India who talks about a crop insurance scheme in India. Neil, do you want to jump in and just add a comment there?
Hey, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Neil.
Okay, yeah, you see, the insurance companies essentially also want to be making money out of insurance, and they have a big problem. Even with the best of forecasting technology, they don't know how much will be the dole out, and they would insure only guys who are willing to pay better premiums. Whereas the government jumped in because they can act as a hedger, and that's where it really helped, because then en masse, a lot of people with small crops, as it was mentioned, could also get insured. And the big problem is that if rain fails, it fails for everyone, and there is a huge dole out, which only government kind of machinery can support. So I thought I'll just mention about it. Government as well is one of the stakeholders.
And this is something that the government in India is working on. Is that what you're saying, Anil?
Yes, that's right. And what they have said is, what is the minimum he should have to survive in case the crop fails? Let us give that as a benefit, and then work out what should be the premium. What is the premium? If you cannot afford it, let's the government dole it out.
Elsie, were you about to say something? Or Emily?
Well, I would just say that there are, that's marvelous. And in places where government is not willing to play that role, philanthropy is coming in now and partnering with development agencies to create markets for this kind of thing. It's a more blended kind of finance. So yes, it's a way to offload some of the risk. That's, I'd like to know more about that. I would like to know more about that if you can text or send me a note about it.
Yeah,
Great.
sure. I'll do that.
Thank you.
Great.
But it's also important, yeah, Anil, it's also important to bring these topics to classrooms and everywhere we go. Your question is substantial. The least we can do is contextualize for everybody the perspective of the other on whose backs literally we're all resting, such as, you know, farmers. So constantly bring that to the forefront is key. Those perspectives, even though we're in the classroom, from our environment and our larger ecosystem, to understand who the stakeholders are, what is at stake for all of us in those vital concerns.
Absolutely. And many of the engineers actually go and join the government subsequently.
Good. I wish we could go on and on and on. This is such a fascinating subject, Elsie. I'm so glad that you thought of bringing in Mila into this discussion, and I'm so glad that James Trevelyan from Australia brought in his wisdom to our discussion, and Anil and everybody else is here together with us. It's just the beginning. I'm sure these kind of discussions need to go on in various settings, and we will overcome, as they say, right? Okay, so Elsie, any last comments from you?
Thank you. This has been a marvelous experience, and engineering educators, you all have a lot of positive contribution to make, and we need it now, not just in the traditional way, but in your participating in the beginning of these discussions.
Okay, and with that, I'll say Jai Ho, as we say in most of our webinars in India. So that's victory to us, to all of us. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Yeah,